Whew. Okay, I am legitimately nervous right now. This does not happen often.
I am too.
And I can tell you are.
I am.
The chairman, Vince McMahon.
It has been said that anything can happen here in the World Wrestling Federation, but now more than ever, truer words have never been spoken.
He is very intimidating, and he's a billionaire, and he's, you know, the creator of this massive, iconic company. But deep down, he's just a dude that likes to hang out, likes to joke, and likes to drink.
Quite frankly, from my standpoint, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm what makes this company, I'm what makes my company and this country go round and round.
I'm Vince McMahon, damn it, let's hear it!
This morning, Vince McMahon, the CEO who transformed pro wrestling into a global powerhouse, now faces a hush money scandal.
Somebody call my mama. I am the boss. Oh, damn it! Oh, unbelievable!
Vincent Kennedy McMahon has lived a life unparalleled. From humble and tough beginnings, through his adolescence spent learning the inner workings of a business which he defines. A man of immense power and ego, charisma, charm, and dedication to his family, his fans, and most importantly, the wonderful and often weird world of professional wrestling. As the head of the largest company the industry has ever seen, Mr. McMahon has taken what life has thrown at him and flourished, bringing with it all the financial and emotional rewards one might expect for a billionaire. However, with this level of control and power comes with it a darker side. In this video, I want to look at the rise of possibly the single most influential figure in pro wrestling history, his achievements, innovation and successes in a career spanning almost 50 years, and also, later, his downfall, as this once great figurehead became embroiled in lawsuits and court cases. Allegations holed McMahon's way regarding drug trafficking, sexual misconduct, and even murder, all taken in his stride. But money, confidence, and bravado will only ever get you so far, even for someone as seemingly untouchable as Vincent Kennedy McMahon. All of that evil will catch up to you eventually, and ultimately find out if he really is the most important person in all of pro wrestling history.
All this from a temperamental, dyslexic kid who grew up in a trailer park. He's fought his way since childhood, determined to take on the critics, a billionaire, and the U.S. government.
Unbelievable!
Born Vincent Kennedy Lupton after his father on August the 24th, 1945 in North Carolina. You may be forgiven for thinking that the second this baby was born, it was thrust into the world of professional wrestling. However, when his father left to travel for business, young Vinnie Lupton was subjected to a lonely and tortured childhood. My parents got divorced and I went with my mum, Vicky. She was in the church choir, a real performer, a female Elmer Gantry, very striking with an excellent voice. Lived with her and my real asshole of a stepfather, a man who enjoyed kicking people around. Travelling from one tiny apartment to the next through trailer park caravans and near homelessness, it is fair to say that this young man was forced to learn how to be tough. I grew up dirt poor. When you're in that class, a lower economic class, everyone is above you. And there were a number of individuals who thought they were above me because of their economic situation. It always bugged me that people would think they were better than me. His mother, Victoria, suffered through several abusive relationships, and by her side the whole time was the unfortunate and very much innocent child. I grew up in a very aggressive environment, to say the least. That includes any number of individuals beating the hell out of me only because I had a big mouth and had to say what was on my mind. One man who proved to be particularly vicious gave young Vince his surname in Leo Lupton. On his violent stepfather's behaviour, Vince later commented, "It's unfortunate that he died before I could kill him. I would have enjoyed that." I think you have to develop an attitude. From the severity that I experienced, taking numerous beatings and things of that nature, I developed a defensive philosophy that has served me very well through the years. That is, if I lived through whatever the adversarial position was, I won. No matter what happens, if I'm still breathing in and out, I won. So, if you have that kind of philosophy, then failure is not a big thing. If the physical and mental abuse suffered at the hands of his stepfathers weren't enough, Vince McMahon later admitted in an interview that he was sexually assaulted as a child. A fact disgusting and terrible enough for any one person to suffer. However, the perpetrator of said horrific acts makes the whole ordeal something even more sinister. In an interview with Playboy magazine, the interviewer asked, "Was the abuse all physical, or was there sexual abuse too?" "That's not anything I would like to embellish just because it was weird," Vince replied. "Did it come from the same man?" "No, it wasn't. It wasn't from the male." Later on in the interviewer asked, "We can leave that topic, but one last thing first. You said that the sexual abuse in your childhood wasn't from the male. It's well known that you're estranged from your mother. Have we found the reason?" To which Vince nodded, saying, "Without saying that, I'd say that's pretty close."
Unbelievable!
At the age of 12, Vince's father, Vincent James McMahon, returned into his life. By this time, he had arrived through the door with a successful pro wrestling company and a desire to take over the entire independent wrestling scene in North America. Vincent J. McMahon saw the wider appeal of national wrestling and correctly assumed that the television exposure would bring in larger audiences than mere local house shows. "If this is the way television kills promoters," he famously said in 1956, "I'm going to die a very rich man." Vince said, "I would see him in the summertime and on the occasional holiday. That he was able and willing to send me to that school made an impression. It was a chance to start over. Maybe it doesn't seem that I changed, since I was the first cadet in school history to be court-martialed, but I at least started to change. No one really knew who I was at Fishburne. I had no badass reputation to uphold." Vince Jr. was heading down the wrong path in life. His horrible childhood meant that he had become frustrated and violent. It's frustrating for a child to know that you're different and you don't fit in. Maybe you're not quite as bright and you're made fun of. Kids will do that. I guess maybe I always resorted back to the one common denominator when I was terribly frustrated like that, and that of course would be physicality. He even admitted to breaking a few laws in his wilder days. "I stole automobiles, but I always brought them back. I just borrowed them, really. There were other thefts too, and I ran a load of moonshine in Harlow, North Carolina, in a 1952 Ford V8. That was a badass car at the time." But his father's re-emergence felt like a new start, a ray of hope for young Vinny. The pair connected emotionally through wrestling. Vincent J. McMahon would take his young teenage son to see great battles performed inside Madison Square Garden. Just like any boy of his age, the younger Vincent fell in love with the spectacle and the power on display, telling his father that he wanted to immediately begin wrestle training. This idea was instantly shut down by his dad, who explained that young Vinny was destined to be a successful promoter and businessman and should always maintain distance with the performers. "I got into it really, somewhat as a family affair. My granddad was promoting boxing and wrestling back in New York City, principally in one of the old Madison Square Gardens, and from there, my dad, having helped his father promote wrestling and more boxing in those days, putting show card up and selling tickets and whatever it may be, and sort of got in my father's blood. And of course, I grew up in the business, so it naturally got in my blood, and I can't get it out. I love it." In 1961, during a service which the young Vince regularly attended, he was introduced to a young teenager by the name of Linda at church. Both have since said that they knew it was love at first sight, the pair going on to be married until this very day. We will see later on in this story, however, that this infatuation did not pave the way for a smooth or ordinary relationship by any means. When I hear people from the project or anywhere else blame their actions on the way that they grew up, I think it's a crock of shit. You can rise above it. This country gives you opportunity if you want to take it, so don't blame your environment. I look down on people who use their environment as a crutch. Vinny studied at Fishburne Military School in Virginia, and even with all of his home life issues, managed to graduate in 1964. Something which is all the more impressive considering Vince has since found out he is mildly dyslexic and has been his entire life. This doesn't mean he was entirely well behaved, however. I was lucky and a little crafty. I wasn't caught for some stuff that would have meant immediate dismissal, like stealing the Commandant's car. Colonel Zinnecker had an old green beat-up Buick, and he always left the keys in it. He also had a dog he was nuts about. I love animals, but one day I couldn't resist giving that dog a laxative. I put the laxative in some hamburger, and the dog did his business all over the Commandant's apartment, which thrilled me greatly. His time at school also hampered by his indifference to learning. He said, "I hated economics, sat in the back row, didn't like the subject. It's all about numbers, not people. Wasn't wild about statistics either. I didn't do well scholastically. Had a grade point average of 2.001. You needed a 2-point average to graduate. I had to go back to a couple of professors to get them to change me from a B+ to an A, or I wouldn't have made it." 4 years later, he continued his studies and remained dedicated to his own self-improvement when he graduated with a degree in business studies in 1968 from East Carolina University. Without a champion and with their relationship with the NWA, Mont and McMahon split away and formed their new wrestling company, WWWF, at this time. The Worldwide Wrestling Federation was as much of a success as it was a mouthful to say. The company exploded onto the wrestling scene to much applause. Regardless of the horrors and triumphs we'll witness as this story progresses, Vincent McMahon has always strived to deliver to his children what his mother and father failed to provide to him. When it comes to his children, Vince McMahon has proven his worth as a loving and devoted father, as well as a provider to both of his kids. Vince and Linda celebrated their first child when Shane McMahon was born in 1970.
The product of my semen is my son, Shane.
Their second child, Stephanie, was born 6 years later. The family grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, in a gigantic mansion surrounded by beautiful woodland and natural splendor, full of all the luxuries afforded by Vince's ever-growing wrestling company. We will learn much more about the dynamics of the McMahons at home and see how both Stephanie and Shane's relationship with their father and with one another will directly impact the very future of the billion-dollar monopoly.
And I'm a victim of what came out of your demon-infested womb.
Wade Keller said. Jeff Jarrett was having dinner with the McMahons, and either he or someone at the table said, "Shane, you know, someday you're going to be running the company like your dad." And Stephanie was years younger than Shane, established her alpha attitude. She jumped in and said, Daddy's little girl is going to be the one running the show someday, not Shane. That rivalry has been there. The divide between those two, I'm told, is still there, and there's no reconciliation of power. By 1971, Vince McMahon Jr. was ready to take his first steps into becoming a wrestling promoter in his own right. All this time, I'd been pestering my dad to let me work with him. "Come on, Pop, you know I love this stuff." He had a promoter in Bangor, Maine, who had been caught stealing above and beyond the norm, I should say. In those days, all the promoters stole, but you can steal too much, and then you're a thief. By 1971, WWWF's popularity was once again on the rise as they started to put on now iconic matches at Madison Square Garden in New York once again, and the Shea Stadium. With Bruno Sammartino at the top of the card against heels who were usually brought to the ring by a valet or manager, McMahon brought in industry legends such as Ernie Roth, the Grand Wizard of Wrestling, great name, classy Freddie Blassie, and Captain Lou Albano to act as these managers for the bad guys and draw boos from the crowd, adding intrigue to the matches. The company was seeing increased revenues at this time, larger crowds and bigger paychecks for the wrestlers, who were making more money on average than professional baseball players of the day. This only further goes to show how incredibly dedicated and hard-working this man is and has forever been. Vince reportedly only ever sleeps around 4 hours a night, saying, "I don't like to sleep, I'm missing something when I'm sleeping." And even in his progressed age, spending his days working from the moment he wakes. Kurt Angle said, "Sometimes at 1 a.m. in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, Vince would call me and ask me if I'm okay, what I thought about the show that night. Vince, when he gets done with the show, he wraps up the show, he gets into his limo, he goes to the hotel, and then they rent out a gym in that city, and Vince works out from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning. Then he goes back to the hotel, goes to sleep from 4:30 to 6, and then he wakes up again. He takes an hour-and-a-half nap and that's it. He's a monster. He does that every day." Consistently, Vince McMahon hits the gym, a peak specimen of human performance. Vince McMahon has shown both physical and mental tenacity throughout his entire career, juggling monumental decisions and grueling office hours and travel time with a desire to maintain his superb physical conditioning. Triple H said of his father-in-law, "Look, Vince is incredible, and you can say in every level, he's 75 plus, his work ethic is greater than anybody I've ever seen. Still to this day, he's in the office first thing in the day, he's there all day, he's meeting with writers till 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, and he goes downstairs and trains. His trainer is there at ungodly hours. He goes downstairs at 2 a.m. and gets after it. He doesn't sleep that much, still trains like that, still eats, very particular about his food. He's just a machine. He's just a very disciplined person, and his work ethic is second to none. It's most people that work in this company. I think long term, there's just a burnout factor. It's hard to hang with him for a long period of time. If you're on the same schedule he's on, it's 24/7. And that is something that has remained throughout his entire career in front of the television camera, morphing from a seriously impressive physique into one which draws shock and awe. Everything's better when you're in shape. Food tastes better, sex is better, even breathing is easier. This man's in his late 70s, for goodness sake, appearing in world-leading fitness and muscle magazines as a shining example of what sheer determination looks like. Big E said, "We have these long drives, and we'll get in around 2 or 3 in the morning, and his personal trainer has been standing outside the whole time, waiting for him, because he'll come in and work out after shows and after long drives. This man is in his 70s, and he's working out hard. He's a meathead in a way." Vince's insane attitude towards continual work has also proven to have its downsides, however, with some former employees explaining that Vince believes that everyone should be as fast-paced and productive as he is. Road Dogg said, "So what am I to be mad about? Who am I supposed to be mad at? Because I can't keep up with him? Because I can't outwork the superhuman worker? The man is a machine, and he works and works and works, and I personally couldn't keep up with him, and that's on me, that ain't on him." A former WWE creative writer explained a similar feeling. Vince is a workaholic, and if anything gets in the way of his work, it makes him angry.
And despite overwhelming attacks branding him everything from desperate to evil, he is without apology, expanding his reach and his empire.
In 1979, the world was once again in a state of flux. In an attempt to rebrand the company, the name was shortened to World Wrestling Federation, a name that would usher in a new era of wrestling for not only Vincent J. McMahon, but his family and the wrestling world at large. 1980 saw Vincent Kennedy McMahon and his wife Linda form Titan Sports Inc. in South Yarmouth, Massachusetts. By 1982, Vince McMahon Jr., Vincent J. McMahon's son, stepped up his role in the company after years of learning the inner workings of the wrestling industry, purchasing the Capital Wrestling Corporation and WWF from his father on June 6, 1982. With it, assuming complete control of the brand and heading up its new board of decision-makers. Soon after, in 1983, at the annual meeting of the National Wrestling Alliance, Vince McMahon Jr., or Vincent Kennedy McMahon, backed out of his commitments and cut ties with the NWA, which, understandably, angered the other promoters and started huge rivalries between the WWF and the NWA territories as the WWF sought to run shows across the whole country. WWF and Vincent K. McMahon used this new wider coverage to leverage deals with advertisers and large television companies. This afforded the WWF a bankroll that would allow them to continue their acquisition of new talent and go on to headhunt the best performers in the business. The wrestling world was changed forever as soon as the ink had dried on McMahon's ownership contract, taking the WWF as a regional promotion and using the existing platform to create industry icons and pop culture figures such as Rowdy Roddy Piper and Hulk Hogan, all of whom had previous relationships with the NWA.
Unbelievable. After a violent and troubled youth and against the odds, he single-handedly took a dying sport and turned it into a juggernaut.
Unbelievable!
On March 31st of 1985, WWF's Wrestlemania aired from Madison Square Garden in New York, the spiritual home of the WWF, and premiered live on MTV. A partnership known as the Rock and Wrestling Connection proved extremely fruitful for all involved, with WWF promoting the event as a supercard, inviting the likes of Muhammad Ali, Mr. T, Cyndi Lauper and Liberace to participate in the groundbreaking event. Wrestlemania was the first ever pro wrestling pay-per-view and saw the inception of a business model for WWF that would evolve and adapt all the way until the modern day. Hogan's inclusion in the main event was a given. The show was designed in part to be built around Hulkamania. Vince McMahon saw a perfect chance to bring more eyes to their inaugural show with the inclusion of the aforementioned celebrities. Hogan would appear in a tag match paired with actor Mr. T, in a match which included Liberace and Muhammad Ali as the ringside officials. Hogan and Mr. T defeated the heel team of Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. A tag match which, although not the best produced or fondly remembered match, is still incredibly important in the overall timeline of wrestling, marking a turning point in the industry towards the rock and wrestling era. The wrestling avalanche had begun to roll. In 1985, the invention of Saturday Night's Main Event saw WWF and pro wrestling return to network television for the first time since the 1950s. Hogan continued on with his run of high-profile victories within WWF. The next year, at the sequel to Wrestlemania, Vince McMahon wanted to go even bigger than the previous year, so for WrestleMania 2, the event was split across 3 venues. The Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum in New York, the Rosemont Horizon in Illinois, and the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena in LA. Each separate event was put on simultaneously, with the roster being divided into 3 individual cards. The televised event would flip between the 3, with each venue hosting its own co-main event. Mr. T fought in a boxing match against Roddy Piper, a tag title match, and the real main event of the evening, Hulk Hogan defeating King Kong Bundy inside of a steel cage to retain his World Heavyweight Championship. Wrestlemania 4. The legendary wrestling event was promoted as being held at the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino. However, was actually aired from the venue across the road at the historic Atlantic City Convention Hall on March 27, 1988, with an attendance of over 19,000 in the crowd watching a 14-man tournament for the undisputed WWF Heavyweight Championship, with Ted DiBiase being bested in the final by Randy Savage, handing the belt to the Macho Man. The show was generally well received, despite not being one of WWF's biggest drawing shows. Then, towards the next year's WrestleMania 5 on April 2nd, 1989, with Trump's Casino and Hotel sponsoring the event, which again was hosted across the road from Trump's Plaza for the second consecutive year, being the first time that WWF had chosen to stay in the same place for its big show more than once. Matches at the event thrusted the Ultimate Warrior forward in victory of the Intercontinental title against Rick Rude, where the main event saw another classic face-off as the Mega Powers exploded and Hulk Hogan defeated Macho Man Randy Savage with a leg drop for the WWF World Heavyweight belt. These 2 iconic sports entertainment events earned both Vince McMahon and Donald Trump enormous amounts of money and aided in birthing their respect for one another. This mutual respect meant that working together since, has proven successful for both involved, leading to numerous segments on WWE television featuring Donald Trump and the McMahon family, especially Linda McMahon, who benefited and has worked closely with Donald Trump in the years since.
Top hat and Kane. Talk about stepping out for a night on the town.
Vince's love and appreciation for bulging muscles and tortuous veins would extend far beyond his own ironclad physique, when, in 1991, he would form the World Bodybuilding Federation as a subsidiary of Titan Sports. Everything else, however, about the WBF would prove to be unethical, poorly realised, and eventually a massive failure.
Look at that mass! Holy cow! Ooh, look at the striation!
In September the previous year, Vince McMahon had attended the closing ceremony of the Mr. Olympia tournament, which at the time was hosted by the International Federation of Bodybuilding. This well-established name in the world of muscle would prove to be McMahon and his newly formed WBF's greatest rival in the industry. At the Mr. Olympia event, McMahon arrived under the pretense that he was there to promote a supplement brand and fitness magazine for another company. However, always the cunning businessman, McMahon hid his advertisements for his upcoming bodybuilding organisation amongst the three magazines. Leading up to their first live event, WWF begun promoting their new bodybuilding show on pro wrestling television as a way to ramp up interest. Vince McMahon promised a more exciting and engaging form of bodybuilding, the likes the world had never before seen. He paid his new roster as much as $400,000 contracts and showed his belief in his new venture. When the IFBB found out that Vince had promoted his show at their Mr. Olympia event, the relationship between the two companies fell apart. The established IFBB prohibited any performers who were signed with McMahon's company from ever competing for their own.
Here he comes, Jerry Stridham. Wow, take a look at that.
But this is Vincent McMahon. He wasn't going to let his first show's disappointment ruin his grand scheme, and got to work promoting the company's second pay-per-view, which promised to be even bigger and more spectacular than the first one. The promotion leading into the event focused on Lex Luger facing off against none other than Lou Ferrigno, world-renowned big man and the actor who played the Hulk on the television around this time. Then it happened. The WWF and Vincent McMahon were embroiled in the largest steroid scandal and trial in pro wrestling history, and all of a sudden questions began to be asked about the legitimacy of the bodies on the display in the WBF as well.
Unbelievable! Unbelievable! Unbelievable!
It's not the first controversy since taking over the company from his father. He was indicted on drug charges in 1993, accused of obtaining steroids for wrestlers.
I watch the pay-per-view Sunday, brother.
Some wrestlers, including Hulk Hogan, testified they would regularly pick up steroids at the company's headquarters in Connecticut. McMahon faced 11 years in prison but was acquitted after the jury found he did not direct wrestlers to take the steroids.
When you consider that in some sports, practically everyone is taking these products, then you're at a distinct disadvantage if you do not.
The current day owner of World Wrestling Entertainment is muscle-clad billionaire Vince McMahon, an abnormally hard-working and dedicated man whose ripped body would lead you to believe that he wasn't in his 80s, having been at the helm of WWE since 1982. A man with a historic appreciation for bodybuilding and physical extremities, even founding the WBF or World Bodybuilding Federation, his own bodybuilding competition, a failed endeavour which only goes to prove Vince McMahon's passion for exhibiting the human form in its most physically impressive.
Vince never forced us to do it, okay? But of course he liked if you did it because you're monsters. You made up money. People want to see monsters.
Vince McMahon has on many occasions been accused of pushing wrestlers too far in their search for muscular perfection. He said, "I've never encouraged anyone at any time to have steroid use in the WWE. You have to understand that back in the 1980s, what the wrestling business was. Some wrestlers had difficulty dealing with success in an ego-driven business. were in the entertainment business, and I would suggest that in that era, it was literally sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You could compare us to rock and roll bands in the early 80s. Spearheaded by Vince McMahon, the late 80s and early 90s were certainly a time in which the performers in pro wrestling were at their most physically ballooned.
They had a doctor there that would give you any steroid you want. I mean, he carried it. You didn't open strip nothing. He had a big bag. Anybody want this? Just like this.
This is not cheating. Not when everyone does it.
As we see, Hogan decided to lie his way through the interview, stating he'd never taken steroids and that the only way to make it to the top like him was through hard work. Oh, brother.
One of these little dudes out there that's been training, saying his prayers and eating his vitamins, someday he's going to knock me off.
David Schultz, a fellow pro wrestler and companion of Hulk Hogan, said, "I injected Hogan well over 100 times. I regularly gave him shots in the triceps where he couldn't reach himself, and also a few times in the butt."
All he should do is come out and tell him the truth. Quit lying to him. Tell him the truth, and be man enough to tell him the truth. And say, hey, I did steroids, and I've done them for years and years.
Another who, before his death, was outspoken about steroid use in pro wrestling and his involvement was the Ultimate Warrior, Jim Hellwig. If I had to relate anything to the lifestyle, it would be to point out how the demands of pro wrestling differ from the lifestyle of any other organised sports pro athletes. There is no season, you go year round, and with the travel you do, you can fall into a bad habit of burning the candles at both ends. It's easy to fall into a habit of abusing stimulants and painkillers to cover up for lackluster energy. Bottom line is, there are differences between use and abuse, and it's obvious that many guys cross the line.
The WWF has one of the most comprehensive drug testing, education, and rehabilitation programs in all of sports. This program will now be expanded to include testing for anabolic steroids. In short, the standards of excellence the athletes in the WWF live by will become the standard bearer for all professional sports for years to come. That's why when you see this symbol, you can be assured of drug-free sports entertainment that you and your entire family can be proud of.
As the Ultimate Warrior seemingly struggled to balance his unrealistic expectations of his body, his public perception, and the pressure from WWE, fractures began to appear between Jim Hellwig and the pro wrestling behemoth. Vince McMahon, since Hellwig's passing, commented, "Warrior's experiments with growth hormones were the reason, but the steroids use was another big factor for the Ultimate Warrior's death." In 1991, Hellwig's relationship with WWE was further tarnished when Vincent McMahon was charged with routinely obtaining anabolic steroids by the US attorney in New York. The pro wrestler's use of performance enhancers was put under a very public spotlight for the first time, as witnesses from the wrestling world were called to stand to testify.
Oh, my brother, testify!
In 1994, the WWF's biggest star, industry icon Hulk Hogan, testified not only that he had tried steroids, but that he had in fact been a regular steroid user for over 14 years. His defense was that he had been told the substances were above board and as a licensed doctor had given them to him.
Dr. George Zahorian was the ringside physician for the Pennsylvania Athletic Commission. Last June, he went on trial for illegally selling steroids to professional wrestlers. Hulk Hogan was called to testify, but was excused at the last minute. Dr. Zahorian testified he had treated Hulk Hogan for a serious steroid abuse problem with success. Hogan says he only used steroids 3 times for treatment of an injury and under a doctor's careful supervision.
I think the mindset changed around 1990 when it became illegal. There was an era when it wasn't just steroid use in the WWE, but it was predominant in every single sport across the board. Every sport in the world was doing it. The mindset was, it was safer than taking sugar. At that time, every wrestler I knew was taking part in steroid use in WWE. I'm sure Hulk Hogan in his head thought if he denied extensive steroid use in the WWE in 1991, the media would move on. Who would have ever thought his denial would cause a steroid media buzz which attacked wrestling so fierce with major ramifications? Desirable TV time slots were lost, merchandise died in retail stores, sponsors left in droves, the fan base dwindled. Did you take a shower? Yeah. Did you brush your teeth? Yeah. Did you take your steroids? Yeah. That was the deal. It was how I lived. Another charge brought against Vincent McMahon was his involvement with the doctor who has prescribed the steroids to so many wrestlers who were employed by WWE. Dr. Zahorian was well known in the sporting world for supplying anabolic steroids to some of the world's top performers. Zahorian was well known at this time for regularly shipping drugs to WWE's headquarters in Connecticut.
Their philosophy was, if I take one pill, it's going to make me strong. If I take 10 pills, it's going to make me 10 times stronger.
Zahorian would also routinely meet with wrestlers in his office in Hershey, in Pennsylvania. Rowdy Roddy Piper recalled, the doctor was an extremely nice and very popular urologist who would supply various drugs to the wrestlers. During the trials of McMahon and Zahorian, the Justice Department went on to uncover heaps of evidence linking the two, saying that Zahorian sold steroids and drugs to 43 pro wrestlers, 37 of whom were employed by McMahon's WWF when deliveries were made, most of which were later proven to not even have a prescription attached. Zahorian originally came to the attention of the authorities when he alerted them with his open bragging about his connections to some of the world's most recognizable pro wrestlers. Zahorian then unknowingly sold $650 worth of performance-enhancing drugs to a federal informant, whilst bragging about the potency of the substances in question on a secret tape. Maybe most incriminating for Zahorian was when, in 1991, federal officers kicked down his front door only to find Zahorian huddled over in the corner of his office, frantically running documents through a paper shredder.
The wrestlers who testified at Dr. Zahorian's trial said that when they couldn't see Dr. Zahorian personally, he sent them steroids by Federal Express. Records show several Federal Express shipments from Dr. Zahorian to Terry Bollea.
At the trial, Zahorian stated that WWF Secretary Ashley Feinberg regularly arranged for drug shipments. During the 1994 trial, Vince McMahon was questioned as to why, with all of this shady behaviour occurring in the public eye, and with the WWE having zero chance of not being aware of Zahorian's malpractice, their company continued to be affiliated with the dodgy doctor for so long. Especially close connections were recognised between Zahorian and Vince McMahon's right-hand man, Pat Patterson, and his wife, Linda McMahon, during this time. Perhaps not fair or balanced, but certainly fitting for the entertainment Goliath that the legal trial was turned into a media spectacle, with all involved from WWF putting on a performance in front of the crowds, something that comes so naturally to these men and women who have spent most of their lives entertaining the masses. And even with Anita Scales, a WWF booker at the time, testifying that they spoke to WWF's Pat Patterson and Vince's wife Linda McMahon, another executive in the company at the time, Anita claimed to have warned the pair of Zahorian's involvement in the sale of illegal drugs, to which Pat Patterson allegedly retorted, "Keep working with him in Pennsylvania so the performers can get their candy." The proceedings were drawn to a close after countless attempts by WWF lawyer Jerry McDevitt to prove that the accusations against the company were little more than petty revenge from scorned ex-wrestlers who had an axe to grind and little else. Several wrestlers toed the line and claimed they had never spoken to Vince McMahon about steroids and had never seen him use PEDs, whilst others spoke about the connection between Zahorian, McMahon and the WWF. This was met with claims of evidence mishandling of the two key witnesses, and it led to Vince McMahon being acquitted and walking away with little more than a stern talking to and the push to put an end to use of steroids in the WWF. Zahorian, however, did not get off so lightly. He had always been the focus of the evidence, and he was charged with 15 counts for drug trafficking. Aside from a long stretch in prison, Zahorian's only other option was to spill the beans and cooperate with the federal investigation into further accusations against WWF. Part of this new evidence was the claim that WWF's lead attorney, Jack Krill, was informed of a federal investigation against Zahorian by an unnamed state official. This has since led to a memo being uncovered from Linda McMahon to her partners at WWF, which states, "Although you and I discussed before about continuing to have Zahorian at our events as the doctor on call, I think that it's now a good idea," and Vince has agreed, "and would like for you to call Zahorian and tell him not to come to any more of our events, and to also clue him in on any action that the Justice Department is thinking of taking." In 1995, WWF had pulled through the dirt which had been the nationwide sensationalized legal trial and had suffered huge financial losses as it looked to build towards a new generation of pro wrestling in an attempt to shake off the shadows of negativity cast by the steroid scandal. From the time of the trial, the next few years would see a mass exodus of performers from the WWF, the majority of whom were larger-than-life, superhuman torsoed beta gods. The likes of Hercules Hernandez and the Ultimate Warrior have both stated since how, when the rules became more strict and the laws changed, they had a tough time transitioning away from certain chemicals and found it easier to move away from the WWF. By 1993, WWF had moved its Titan HQ to Connecticut and absorbed all other branches of its business, consolidating all of its operations and focusing on a build towards the new generation. After a sexual harassment lawsuit and a huge steroid scandal, losing more than $5 million for WWF at a time where fan interest was dwindling, McMahon had no choice but to implement a drug testing policy across his bodybuilding organisation, and immediately the house of cards collapsed. Half of the roster refused to be tested and cancelled their contracts and decimated plans for their upcoming show. Those who were left were the smaller and less visually impressive performers who had never taken steroids, and a few who had previously taken performance enhancers but had stopped when the testing policy was introduced, leading to a smaller and ever-deflating roster. The final nail in the coffin was the big main event. Lex Luger was injured in the lead-up and could not appear. His opponent Lou Ferrigno also refused to be tested and left the company shortly after. The show proved to be even less successful than the first, with reports explaining that only 3,000 homes bought the pay-per-view and had left McMahon's idea dead in the water. The company was dissolved a month later when Vince called the owners of rival IFBB and conceded to them his defeat. A financial, critical and commercial failure on every front. Vincent McMahon learnt on this day, for the first time, that not everything he touches turns to gold. In the wake of the trial, both Linda and Vince McMahon sought to distance themselves from the legal proceedings publicly, with Linda saying, "I don't pretend to remember to go back, to revisit all the aspects of that case. It has been tried, acquitted and done with, and WWE has evolved its total health and wellness policy over the years. I'm sure it will continue to evolve." Jerry McDevitt further backed up this point, saying, "At no point did they ever charge anybody with any kind of obstruction of justice or whatever it is you were suggesting by that last question, on this memo or otherwise. What I do know is at the trial they failed miserably. They took their best shot, we cross-examined their witness, and the jury had no problem whatsoever acquitting the company of everything the government charged us with." But Vince McMahon saw an opportunity and began to take a different approach.
I think I was sorry when I signed the deal. Bret had leveraged himself against Turner's operation and bid himself up so much, and everyone around me at that time was saying, "Oh, you can't let Bret go." I listened to them. I think I'm sorry that I did.
It was around this time that World Championship Wrestling made a large offer towards Bret, promising a contract that financially far overshadowed his current WWF paycheck. But Bret was undecided. He was going to stay loyal to WWF even if he hadn't been treated the best in recent months, in his opinion. Bret was an honourable man and wasn't going to turn his back on those who had paid his wages for so many years. At this point, Bret was offered a contract which would last longer than any other WWF contract ever signed and would be guaranteed a paycheck every month for 10 years. However, due to the previous conflicts with Shawn Michaels, his only stipulation is that he wouldn't drop the belt to HBK in Canada. This led to a situation where WWF's main champion was about to be out of contract and still in possession of its most important and historical belt. With WCW circling, Vincent McMahon didn't want to lose one of his biggest stars and his biggest titles at the same time, so he made an industry-changing decision. One that not only changed the fate of Bret Hart, but those around him. "I didn't want him to go to WCW with our championship," Vince McMahon said in an interview. "So the request for Bret would be, okay, let's drop this championship back to someone in WWF where it belongs. And that didn't happen, so I had to do what I had to do. It's no different than an actor in a television series who at the end of it refuses to die or refuses to do the job, so to speak. What do you do?"
I talked to Vince and he says I have to lose to Shawn in Montreal.
At the beginning of November, after countless hours spent on the telephone and in the office of Vince McMahon, Bret made his decision, one which must have felt like the ultimate gamble, as he took his pride and his creative control in his hand and signed with WWF's biggest rivals, WCW. To most WWF fans, wrestlers and backroom staff, this was the ultimate betrayal, a moment which saw Bret acting in his own interests, both in terms of his wrestling career and financially. Bret would continue on for the next month after sending a fax to Vincent McMahon, informing him of his final decision on his way to receiving a guaranteed $3 million per year contract down in Orlando. Something which is said to have hurt the personal feelings of McMahon, who believed he'd always done right by Bret. Say what you will about Vincent Kennedy McMahon, but the businessman has assembled an empire through almost half a century as the figurehead of the WWF and now WWE. The man is a billionaire and knows how ruthless one must be in order to steer such an enormous ship. Bret was still being elusive on the week leading into Survivor Series in 1997. He was heading towards WCW, but wasn't willing to give a solid answer when questioned about his plan for dropping the belt. McMahon was backed into a corner. From his point of view, if Bret wasn't willing to operate in the way in which most benefited his company, then McMahon must act in order to correct the company's course.
4 more weeks and I'm out of the WWF. We've all agreed to keep my leaving a secret. But I'm not going to shut up about how I'm feeling about where wrestling's headed.
So there's nothing until Saturday, and then there's the production meeting. And of course, you know, we come in at the end of the production meeting and they're dismissing it and all that kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden everybody's gone and it's just me, Vince, and Jerry Briscoe and Hunter.
Vince McMahon held a meeting at the hotel with Jim Ross, Jim Cornette, Pat Patterson and Michaels. Reports are that at least 2 of the aforementioned names look extremely uncomfortable leaving that meeting, wrote respected wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer in his Wrestling Observer newsletter. Shawn Michaels said to ESPN, "I just recall up to that point there being a big scuttlebutt over what's going to happen with Bret leaving, and then of course was, I guess, an infamous phone call between myself, Hunter and Vince. I want to say it was just the week before. We had the meeting and as everyone was leaving, Vince asked me, Hunter and Jerry Briscoe, a long-time agent and close confidant of Vince, to stay. We sat down and talked," Michaels wrote in his autobiography. Pat was in the room with us earlier and he had no idea what was about to happen. He had a strong relationship with Bret. He wouldn't have done it and Vince knew that. That's why he didn't tell Pat.
Well, Vince and I the night before had talked about it. He said, what do I do if Bret, because we're talking about our exit route, you know, after this thing is through, how we're going, what we need to do.
It was agreed that to get the belt from Bret, some underhanded tactics would be needed, reminiscent of the old-fashioned shoot wrestling events seen in the early days of the NWA. Shawn was going to have to work out a way to win a match against Bret without Bret being a part of the finish, and in a way which would ensure the belt changed hands at the upcoming Survivor Series pay-per-view.
really what they would prefer to do to me tomorrow is a way I would liken it is to actually rape me in the middle of the ring.
Vince McMahon had agreed to split the issue with Shawn. McMahon would take all of the blame for the incident from fans and the wrestlers in the locker room. However, the owner of the company wasn't the one who would be physically in the ring opposite Bret, and thus the final decision on how things played out laid at the feet of Shawn Michaels. When the morning of the 9th of November 1997 arrived, wrestling fans around the world were still unaware that only a few hours later, the WWF, and by extension the entire pro wrestling universe, was about to change. When the Montreal Screwjob occurred, I wanted to make sure that Bret saw me out at ringside and know that what I did was the right thing to do, at least from my standpoint. A truly villainous move on your average show, but when the ref, Earl Hebner, signalled that Bret Hart had submitted, the arena deflated with confusion. Bret clearly hadn't tapped out or shouted that he submitted. He hadn't made any gestures toward the officials and was only in the hold for a second or two. He knew instantly that he'd been screwed. In this moment, Bret lost the WWF Championship to Shawn Michaels, but that wasn't the reason that Hart tried to wrestle Shawn to the mat after the bell. Shot straight over to loom over Vincent McMahon, who had made the call ringside. Then, Bret spat in his face. A disgusting display of aggression from Bret as he brought up a vile wad of phlegm and delivered a sharp shot of his own, spitting to outside the ring like a sniper, landing in the hair and eye of his boss. Bret knew that he'd been betrayed. Barring some run-ins with wrestler's biggest wanker Hulk Hogan, the industry famous backstabbing Bret had up to this point managed to avoid, in part due to his own decisions, had finally caught up to him. As Vince McMahon wiped the gauze from his brow, all hell broke loose.
It was so startling. Mm-hmm. And you got to remember, you know, we're surrounded by hostile people. First of all, they got us out of there because we were throwing stuff. And Bret came over and was, you know, destroyed the monitors as he was irate.
Yeah. Only to find himself face to face with Vince McMahon. I think Vince gambled that I was going to take the high road and say a few words to him, and then I would walk out and grab my stuff and leave the dressing room, and that would be the end of it. And he could say, at least I confronted him. Somewhere in that conversation, I said, if you're still here after I get dressed, I'm going to punch you out. Vince, feeling that he needed to let Bret calm down before he could explain himself, made his way into his office where he says he awaited Hart and his family for a discussion. Vince said straight to me, "This is the first time I've ever had to lie to one of my talents." I said, "Are you kidding me?" Then I rattled off on every finger about 10 different lies he'd told me in the last week. Vince told me, "What I did to you today won't hurt you. You'll still get all the money you're supposed to get from WCW." This only served to further confuse and anger Bret and led to a moment which is still a hot topic for debate, with many wrestlers and WWE staff having separate accounts of what took place. However, the facts are that Bret Hart and Vince McMahon agree on one thing. As tensions boiled over, Bret could no longer be restrained and delivered a furious punch towards his boss, one that landed with an echoing thud. "I could have hid," Vince McMahon said. "I could have not gone out to the ring at all. I could have left the building, and I could have done a lot of things. Bret gave me one punch right to the temple on the left side."
While his ratings have propelled his family-run company's value to almost $1 billion.
Get it?
It was, we need something here. It's here. It's logical. Let's use it as a bridge to get where we need to go. Mr. McMahon at that time was never going to be that long character. You say that now, you look at the McMahon character and what defined Monday Night Raw in so many ways, which were the Steve Austin and Vince McMahon era. At this point, we were only using Vince as the bridge to get us where we needed to go. Following the Screwjob, Vincent McMahon became a staple of the storylines moving forward, taking the final step from behind the scenes, real-life owner of the company, to the fictional Mr. McMahon, a tyrannical and all-powerful boss who sought total control over the wrestlers under his employ and would stop at nothing to see his favourite wrestlers named as champion. He was 100% evil and 100% entertaining, a massive reason as to why WWF exploded in popularity around this time. No chance, that's what you've got. Up against a machine too strong. Greedy politicians buying souls from us are puppets. Will find their place in line. Go tie a string around your finger now, boy, because it's just a matter of time, because you've got no chance in hell. According to composer Jim Johnson, the idea behind his theme song, No Chance in Hell, was he's got the power, the money, and he was pretty much the only game in town. Rather than a song about one man, I wanted it to be about the man. Following his real-life feud with Bret Hart, Vince moved on to a rivalry which many consider to be the greatest of all time, as the owner of the company came face-to-face with the most popular pro wrestler in the history of WWE, Stone Cold Steve Austin, who said, "I guess it came along at the right time and right place. It was just an aggressive time. Vince was ready to go for it." Over the next few years, the pairing of these two men were at the peak of their entertainment powers, would provide wrestling fans with some of the most iconic and beloved moments of all time, such as when Stone Cold used some large machinery to fill Vince's Corvette to the brim with concrete, smashing out the windows and creating quite the mess. Or when Vince McMahon was resting in hospital with an injury when a masked Steve Austin burst onto the scene and delivers a swift beating to his boss. We saw Austin 316 ride a beer truck to ringside and use the hose to soak both Shane and Vince in the ring. Images of that night will ring out forever. Austin said, "I have loved Vince and I have hated Vince. We have fought each other in the ring and out of the ring for real. He's a man of his word and a man of integrity. If he tells you he will do something, he will do it. He wouldn't ask you to do anything that he would not do, and he will give anybody and everybody an opportunity to get to the top. All you've got to do is be hungry enough and willing to walk through fire to get to the top. He'll give you that opportunity. So I don't know if I've told you anything you wouldn't know about him, but he's a man of his word, he's a man of honour. I respect him a lot." Back in 1994, fans wanted change. They were sick of the cartoonish presentation style within WWE at the time, and pay-per-view buys and show attendance began to dwindle. Heading in the complete opposite direction, thankfully, WWE decided to paint the blue bars black in the later part of the 1990s, in fitting with their brand becoming more adult-focused, less colourful, and taking a step away from the perceived neon 90s. The black barred version of the WWE steel cage, although only used sparingly, has a real nostalgia to it looking back, and is perfectly fitting with the feelings of change present in the Attitude Era at the time. A famed moment inside this black cage happened at St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view, during a steel cage match between Vincent McMahon and Stone Cold Steve Austin in 1999. The match also saw the debut of the Big Show, who burst through the ring canvas and threw Stone Cold powerfully towards the steel cage wall. The force of the throw sent Steve Austin through the cage, landing both feet on the floor, and in a moment emblematic of why I love wrestling, won the match and foiled Vince McMahon's plan to have the newly signed Big Show change the tides of the bout. Combined with the rest of the successes during this period, Vince McMahon found himself atop the wrestling mountain, the owner of the monopoly and deliverer of one of WWF's most fondly remembered characters. He was the king of the grappling globe and reaping the rewards. Worth hundreds of millions of dollars at this point, a happy and healthy family at his side through all of his glory. However, as we'll soon find out, some of that money was being used for nefarious and allegedly shady purposes. That family was hiding secrets from one another and from the world, which would eventually come to light. And the character of Mr. McMahon and the real person behind the mask seemingly begun to collide, as this once great icon finds out firsthand what happens when you fly too close to the sun. By the turn of the millennium, the World Wrestling Federation had become the single monopoly within the grappling universe, absorbing their competitors in WCW, and a buyout of ECW later, and Vince McMahon was at the helm of the single largest entity that the pro wrestling industry had ever witnessed. However, with all this success, all the world had its eyes on Vince McMahon's company. The worst possible time then, for one of the darkest and most ill-fated days in all of pro wrestling history to occur. I was bitter towards Vince, especially after the screw job, and I didn't like a lot of what happened with my brother Owen's horrible accident. But I do believe in retrospect, when we look back, that Vince had probably very little to do with what happened to Owen, like he barely even knew what was going on there.
Indeed, tragedy in the ring tonight in the world of pro wrestling. A form of entertainment which is known for its fantastic fiction is now experiencing horrific nonfiction. WWF wrestler Owen Hart, known professionally as the Blue Blazer, died tonight in Kansas City when he fell 50 feet into the ring as he was being lowered from the ceiling at Kemper Arena. The fall occurred in an event called Over the Edge, which was being televised to a pay-per-view audience. The 33-year-old Hart given immediate CPR by paramedics as a stunned crowd watched in horror, realizing that something had terribly gone wrong.
In Kansas City, Missouri, the WWF were running through their usual smooth operations of what, at the time, seemed like another evening of hard-hitting action and over-the-top personalities. Little more than what fans had come to expect at the time. By the time the event was over, the fans in attendance and at home, the WWF staff and all of the wrestlers were involved in a moment that none will soon forget. One which will live in infamy for all of pro wrestling's existence.
It's our top story at 11. A former World Wrestling Federation champ is dead tonight. Once king of the ring, Owen Hart fell from the ceiling during an event in Kansas City. The audience at first thought it was a stunt. Millions of fans were tuned in on pay-per-view TV.
We in the World Wrestling Federation are saddened by the tragic accident that occurred here tonight. And we send our condolences and sympathy to Owen Hart's family.
In the weeks that followed, online forums and newsrooms were alight with controversy over the manner in which the events had unfolded leading up to Owen Hart's death. The speculation revolved around WWF's use of a less safe version of the harness and cable which Hart was using at the time.
This idea was taken to him and it was suggested that he come out of the ceiling. And I know there was a bit of a discomfort about the danger in it, but somehow over the weekend he got sort of talked into doing it again.
This is a stunt that's performed on a routine basis in any number of venues. Owen was simply to descend into the ring in superhero-like fashion.
Why was he not on a belay line or some other backup line, which is normally used for anybody that's using a rigging? That there would be a safeguard that someone would control.
I'm not an expert on rigging, I guess you are.
Well, it would appear that there were no precautionary measures taken. Why not?
First of all, I resent your tone.
I resent the sarcasm. Again,
no, I resent your tone, lady, okay?
Why
you know, this was a tragic accident. It's a tragic accident. Don't try and put yourself in the spotlight here, okay? This was an accident. Do you understand what I'm saying? An accident. And everything that should have taken place in terms of rigging, to our knowledge at this moment, did take place. It was rehearsed in the afternoon, and everything was fine. And that's all I know.
Mr. McMahon, is it true then that Owen did practice 3 or 4 times during the afternoon and everything was set and he felt comfortable with it prior to the actual occurrence?
As far as I know, everything was fine during the afternoon. A number of rehearsals.
As part of Owen's Blue Blazer character, the performer wanted to move away from the ultra-serious, straight-faced Owen Hart and move towards the entertainment potential of a comedy-styled superhero. Prior to the event, Owen Hart had played with the formula of a wrestler being repelled towards the ring from the rafters, when he would be a few feet from the ground, releasing his safety catch and purposely falling flat on his face, drawing laughs and applause from the crowd. WWF and Hart had tried and tested the stunt, and it had proved effective at garnering their required response from the crowd at house shows. However, in order to facilitate the manoeuvre, a different, less safe latch had to be used for the quick release, and without a secondary safety cable, which was the standard at the time. For a month, the accusations flew at WWF and their backroom staff until the Hart family filed a formal lawsuit against the entertainment behemoth, as well as the manufacturer of the harness and cable equipment, stating how dangerous and needless the stunt was, as well as arguing that the necessary safety checks and requirements were not in place, directly leading to Owen Hart's demise. On November 2nd, 2000, after a year and a half in and out of courtrooms, WWF settled with the Hart family being paid $18 million, whilst also dropping the lawsuit against the equipment manufacturer.
They're
Would be a good
you
thing.
a billionaire.
Right.
the
Are
very
you a
next
billionaire?
day.
I don't know.
You are.
It sounds good.
In 1999, World Wrestling Federation became a publicly traded company, offering stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. Like Augustus Gloop in Willy Wonka, at this point, Vince McMahon just wanted it all.
I think it's important to be taken seriously as an entertainment company, and we are that. And we have wound up to be the only entertainment company of its kind, still in existence and flourishing.
Following their success during the Attitude Era and victory in the fabled Monday Night War, this wrestling behemoth was still exploding in popularity. With these new heights of success and swaths of growing fan bases around the world, meant that the already grueling travel schedule within WWF was about to become even more brutal. Vince McMahon wanted to continue his world conquest, and part of his plan was to send out his roster of talented men and women to perform in other countries and attract even more viewers. This meant more money for the company, more shows would mean more ticket sales, more advertising revenue, and more profit for shareholders. However, this more demanding travel schedule would also mean that the performers would be more tired, more worn down, and possibly more reliant on stimulants and depressants to help maintain their schedule and energy. With the ever-growing financial gains of the WWE company and its continued success came many perks and upgrades for the performers and show's producers. One of these benefits came in the way of WWE's own personal plane, a private jet brought to fly company executives and important performers between shows in the United States. The idea was that if the company's top decision makers and employees could travel in luxury and spend less time on the road, they could land in the next town or city feeling refreshed. It was also a huge status symbol for the company's owner, Vincent McMahon, and would be just one way in which he would continue to prove his legitimacy to the business world in light of the company's introduction on the stock market.
Grossed over $400 million just from licensing agreements alone. His marketing empire embraces everything from CDs to restaurants, action figures to condoms.
But a set of customised private jets were not the only lavish expense laid out by Vince McMahon at this time, not by a very, very long way. For the media megalith was on his way to amassing a near $3.5 billion in personal wealth, alongside his 32% controlling stake in one of entertainment's biggest properties. On the way, it's fair to say that he indulged in a fair few vanity projects and displays of his opulent lifestyle. But lavish expenses and personal luxuries weren't the only items on the McMahon's million-dollar shopping list, with an online report stating, McMahon and his wife have donated to various Republican Party causes, including $1 million in 2014 to federal candidates and political action committees, such as Cole Rove's American Crossroads and the research and tracking group America Rising. The McMahons have donated $5 million to Donald Trump's charity, the Donald J. Trump Foundation. The McMahons donated over $8 million in 2008, giving grants to the Fishburne Military School, Sacred Heart University, and East Carolina University. Non-profit Quarterly noted the majority of the McMahons' donations were towards capital expenditures. In 2006, they paid $2.5 million for construction of a tennis facility in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. The McMahons have supported the Special Olympics since 1986. first developing an interest through their friendship with NBC producer Dick Ebersol and Susan St. James, who encouraged them to participate.
Of a new theme restaurant where you may have to wrestle someone to get your food. The WWF is ready to smack down some meals, and we were there as their top wrestlers like The Rock were welcomed as the new kids on the eating block. Wrestling fans went wild for their favorite and not so favorite WWF superstars at the opening of a new restaurant bar in New York's Times Square.
In late 1999, Vince wanted to usher in the new millennium with style. He decided to rent space inside the Paramount Theatre, one of the prime locations in the famed Times Square in New York. The unveiling of the new mega complex was McMahon and WWF's way of showing their growth to a truly top brand.
We're right in the middle of it all, and that's really where we belong.
WWF New York opened its doors, promising wrestling fans a closer look at their favourite brand of sports entertainment. Inside the building consisted of an enormous and well-stocked merchandise shop, selling everything from branded t-shirts and replica belts to minifigures and stationery. There was a pro wrestling themed arcade which offered guests a chance to play a whole host of classic WWF video gaming titles. There was a nightclub which would play host to live wrestling events as well as several music shows.
Okay, so this is one of our bars here. Access Hollywood. Come with Ivory and have a cocktail. Okay, here we are in the nightclub scene. We got a dance floor for everyone to boogie down tonight and a stage. Now, you know, this used to be the old Paramount. Frank Sinatra sang on that very stage behind me. There's a really neat cage room I want to show you where people like Brock and Stone Cold will be doing their autograph signings.
And the main attraction for many, the WWF-themed restaurant, with a chance for you to dig in some classic American chow. As you wander through this grappling mecca, you'll find rare and unusual artifacts from the industry's past and hear iconic entrance themes played through the speakers.
Earlier in the day, sexy female wrestler Ivory gave us a guided tour of the new 46,000-plus square foot complex.
As a lifelong wrestling fan, this sounds like a dream. All my nerdy fandom in one place, where fellow enthusiasts from around the world can travel to, all the while enjoying live pro wrestling pay-per-views for free, surrounded by like-minded friends. Fantastic. However, as quickly as the WWF had opened the New York operation, key elements began to fall apart. The prime location which was chosen as the location came at a price, and as you can imagine, being in the centre of one of the world's most desirable cities, that cost was astronomical. Rent on the property being at such an inflated price meant either WWF needed to sell an incredible number of wrestling tees and chicken wings, or the prices would have to inflate to compensate. When the fans' reaction to the WWF New York was more tepid than expected, the price of every item on sale skyrocketed. This meant that you now were paying good restaurant quality prices for what was essentially bar grub. You were paying double for merchandise in stores as you could via the WWF catalogue, so sales continued to taper off. The nightclub could only host so many fans, and thus the free entry and free pay-per-views turned into paid tickets and wristbands, further pushing away patrons. In 2001, WWF played host to the Misfits twice, but failed to capitalise on the uptake in interest in their venue. Even a fabled after-party show hosted by Prince and featuring Alicia Keys wasn't enough to give the premise an allure of cool. There was just something about sweaty pro wrestlers, screaming arcade-bashing children, body odour-laden teenagers grabbing all of the merch, and a $30 plate of microwave spaghetti which failed to attract a crowd. The finances for the new venture spiralled, and Linda McMahon held a press conference in February of 2003 to announce that the company would be closing the restaurant and nightclub and focus on the merchandise and international expansion of their brand. 2 months later, however, this was proved to be only the start of the end for WWF New York. The WWE announced that they would be closing all operations inside the building and pulled out of the premises by the middle of the year. The collapse of the business is reported to have cost Vince McMahon $25 million of his own money. In February of 2000, rumours began to circulate about Vince McMahon's plans to create an opposing American Football League to run in direct competition with the NFL. As insane as that may seem, it was far from a mere rumour, as the catastrophe of the XFL played out over the next 2 decades. Fans watching the XFL will see this game as they have never seen professional football before. You'll see coaches berating players, You'll see players berating players. You'll see certain calls made in the huddle actually as it's being done. And you will see the quarterback and his point of view and hear his passion. It's all about passion and the players and the coaches and the passion they have for the game. You're going to be able to have a professional football experience. It will be an XFL experience. You won't just be watching a football game. They're all about corporate boxes. You have quiche and champagne and things of that nature. They're all about corporate America, and I think that's not real sport. I think that many times they've lost contact with their real audience, which is mainstream, middle-class America, and I think that's a shame.
What, we have cheerleaders? We said right out front we were going to have cheerleaders, nice-looking ladies that you were going to get to know, unlike the NFL, sort of has them but doesn't have them kind of a thing. If nothing else, we are brutally honest about who we are and what we are presenting.
The official XFL website from 2001 explains the planned rosters. 8 teams were announced, 3 in cities with current NFL teams, New York, Chicago and San Francisco, and the remaining 5 without, Las Vegas, Memphis, Orlando, Los Angeles and Birmingham. 2 divisions consisted of 4 teams each. One of the biggest selling points for the XFL, and a subject which was widely promoted across WWF television and beyond, were the cheerleaders.
To introduce all of you ladies to the one man that's going to be privileged enough to walk into your locker room with a camera. And here he is. His name is Bruno. Say hi to the girls, Bruno. Hi, girls. Have fun.
Official website explaining. The initial kickoff weekend came with a tremendous amount of fanfare and overwhelming television ratings. Viewers and fans were no doubt drawn by the racy cheerleaders, who some people equated as nothing more than strippers. No matter how skimpy the outfits, most came to watch the football games.
If you smell what the Rock is cooking.
The Rock says, finally, professional football has come back to Los Angeles. If you smell what the XFL is cooking.
The inaugural season finale came with the $1 Million game, in which the XFL awarded the winning team's players $1 million to be shared amongst them. After the initial glitter of the new, shiny XFL had worn off, fans left in their droves, as they realised the quality of the product that they were watching. All of the most talented athletes were already signed with the NFL, meaning Vince was left to pick his huge roster from those who were deemed not adequately skilled for the big league, rookies, and those who were way past their prime. The changes which were promised by Vince to the presentation of football in the XFL proved to range from disliked to outright hated. The colourful balls were covered in a dye which made them slippery and hard to handle. They had to be sanded with abrasive paper before matches to avoid major fumbles and misthrows.
Some have called it an unprecedented television event. Others have called it a desperate ploy to increase sagging ratings.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the XFL!
The kickoff was changed to have the fastest player from each team race towards the static ball to determine who obtains possession first. However, in the frantic attempt to dive for the start of the match, a player dislocated his shoulder in the very first contest of the season. The cheerleaders proved to be more of a distraction than a titillation and were universally panned for their over-involvement. So, with a worse product than the NFL, less quality players, much lower viewership and a dwindling fan retention rate, Vince began hemorrhaging money. We are all proud of the creative innovations that we introduced in the production of the game, as well as in the rule changes that were implemented to increase the excitement and enjoyment of the game and provide a fan-friendly brand of football. On May the 11th, 2001, the New York Post reported, Vince McMahon, chairman of the World Wrestling Federation, announced suddenly yesterday that he is terminating the XFL Spring Football League after negotiations between McMahon, NBC and UPN TV broke down. McMahon's loss on the XFL is expected to reach $35 million. As always, Vince was not willing to give up on what he believed to be a good idea. After all, it was his idea, so why wouldn't it be a good one? In 2020, the XFL was reborn, and like a phoenix rose from the ashes, a company exploding into the mainstream, its highly entertaining matches bringing in tens of millions of new American football fans from around the world. The XFL went on to revolutionise the way in which all sports would go on to be played and presented, as Vince McMahon bought every single international sporting franchise and was proclaimed king of the sporting world. Well, we all know none of that happened. When the league kicked off for the second time in February of 2020, the league was to be contested by 8 teams who would fight for a place in the final match, to take place a few months later. However, in April of 2020, the XFL, for the second time, was brought to a close by Vince McMahon. Just halfway through its second inaugural season, the rest of the planned games had to be cancelled. This time, the reasoning cited was the difficulties faced due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With the league shuttered and no more games being played or revenue being generated, the COVID-19 pandemic left the XFL facing near-term liquidity issues. With the duration of the pandemic uncertain and the XFL's operating expenses continue unbated, the XFL was left with few viable alternatives. Vince had sold $3.2 million worth of WWE stock to fund a $500 million development of the XFL under another company name called Alpha Entertainment. He had hired almost 1,000 staff, including athletes, production crew and management. This money was now lost for a second time on a major gamble with the XFL, which just didn't pay off. What also happened was more lawsuits fired in McMahon and the XFL's direction. Mr. Luck wholly disputes and rejects the allegations set forth in the termination letter and contends they are pretextual and devoid of merit. WWE replied with a statement on the situation. Oliver Luck's services as Commissioner and CEO of the XFL were terminated by a letter sent to him on April the 9th, which explained the reasons for the termination. As to the lawsuit he filed, his allegations will be disputed, and the position of Mr. McMahon will be set forth in our response to his lawsuit.
The WWE in football. Nah.
In 2001, Vince continued his attempts at conquering the world of lowbrow entertainment when he entered into financial discussions with the founder of successful pornography enterprise Girls Gone Wild. WWF had worked closely with the company when they collaborated on a special episode of WWF Gone Wild. Vince McMahon saw the owner, Joe Francis, as an ally and attempted to persuade him to go in on a deal together to buy Playboy. I hooked up Joe Francis and WWE to do a show. I set up a meeting with Joe Francis and Linda McMahon because Vince was interested in buying Playboy and Joe Francis was also interested in buying Playboy for different reasons, so they both had different goals. They were both interested in the same property, so I got those two together and Linda had a meeting with Joe in Los Angeles because of me. WWE had sent many of its top female stars to Playboy for revealing photo shoots, which reportedly sold millions of copies. The likes of Chyna, Tori Wilson and Sable all taking off their clothes as part of a cross-promotion between Vince's company and the legendary Smut magazine. But a deal could not be completed for Vince's financial takeover of the brand. The pair of companies continuing their partnership, it wasn't until 2008 when WWE gained a television PG rating when it formally distanced itself from the Playboy brand and pornography in general. From 2001, when Vince soon realised that in order to better manage the enormous roster he was now the sole owner of, he would need to split the company into two separate and competing brands, with WWE SmackDown and Raw to air as rival programs with rival rosters. The brand split meant that, in opposition to the dastardly McMahon character, the other show would be run by another on-screen manager. Mere days after it was announced that Vince had purchased WCW, a simulcast took place where both companies' shows would air simultaneously under the ownership of WWE. However, on the night, just as Vince was celebrating his business strategy, his son Shane came across the airwaves from the WCW portion of the show. As the program went off air, Shane explained that when Vince was about to purchase the company, Shane managed to somehow sneak in and alter the WCW contract. Where the new owner's name was found on the paperwork, it did say McMahon, but to the shock of audiences around the world, it said Shane McMahon. This led to the beginning of the invasion of Vince McMahon's company at the hands of their long-term Monday Night War rivals. Over the next few years, we saw the likes of Mick Foley, William Regal, and even Stephanie McMahon take up the role of opposing manager to Vince McMahon. Around this time, Ric Flair arrived back in the company after 8 years away in WCW and took control of Raw. Flair proclaimed himself the joint owner of the company, which caused a huge backlash from McMahon. The pair's feud boiled over on the microphone and led to a street fight at the 2002 Royal Rumble. Ric Flair won the match, but Vince McMahon managed to maintain control over SmackDown. When Vince defeated Flair in a match in June later in the year, he became the sole owner of the company once again. During this time, Vince's on-screen character began to grow and evolve. With it, he needed a cast of supporting allies to help him in his evil undertakings and to oppose his devilish deeds. When it was decided by the writing team of McMahon that they would introduce Vince's fictional family, they could find no better actors for the role than the real-life counterparts they were attempting to depict. Linda McMahon appeared on screen as Vince's wife and confidant. However, she regularly foiled her husband's sexual conquests and at times operated as the co-owner of the company during storylines and in real life. When Vince was caught having a storyline fling with Trish Stratus, his wife Linda fell into a vegetative state due to the shock. Their doting son Shane came to Linda's aid and was furious at what Vince had caused. Vince spent the following weeks pushing his wife around in a wheelchair whilst he lusted after Trish in full views of the television cameras as well as his children and wife. Trish was forced to parade around in her underwear and even made to act like a dog in the middle of the ring. This led to a match at Wrestlemania in 2001 between Shane McMahon and his lecherous father, with Trish Stratus, Stephanie and Linda McMahon ringside, and Mick Foley acting as guest referee. It was a complicated setup, but at its core, the match told a violent and brutal story of a son gaining revenge for actions by his father on his mother, something which Vince admits was cathartic, taking into account his own interactions with an abusive stepfather. The highlight of the match came when Linda rose from her wheelchair behind Vince's back and delivered a swift but effective kick to her husband's testicles. A moment which, regardless of how silly it sounds 20 years on, received one of the most emphatic and excitable crowd reactions in recent memory. You
know what I see? I see your mother. I see two spoiled, ungrateful.
In 2003, Vince's daughter Stephanie, who would later go on to be the co-CEO and chairwoman of the company, began her ascension to power. On screen, the pair were continually arguing about Vince's infidelity and his romantic involvement with WWE performer Sable. Oh my goodness, well, I did have to wrestle my father in what may be the first ever father-daughter match, 6 days before my actual wedding. So that's an interesting moment. My mum was so mad at my dad. If you give her a black eye, if she gets a black eye before her wedding, I'm going to kill you. So that was a very interesting moment. At the No Mercy pay-per-view, Vince McMahon proved to still be the most evil man in the business as he defeated his own flesh and blood in an intergender I Quit match. After his victory, the McMahons were torn apart as they consoled their youngest member in the ring. Vince celebrated his victory in a grotesque manner. This would prove to be Stephanie's last involvement on screen in WWE for the next couple of years.
Yes, I mean, why not? I mean, you know, as a flexible human being and a flexible businessman, you have to go with, you know, what conditions are. Conditions change sometimes beyond anything you have to do with them, and you either rock with them or you die.
In 2002, WWF had a dispute with the World Wildlife Fund over the use of their identical initials. When we first registered our name in the early 1980s, the Wildlife Fund did not raise any challenges. Then WWE CEO Linda McMahon told the New York Times in 2002. A press release from the same year continued. The company began considering dropping the word Federation from its name when World Wildlife Fund prevailed in a recent court action in the United Kingdom. The court ruling prevents the World Wrestling Federation from the use of the logo it adopted in 1998 and the letters WWF in specified circumstances. The fund has indicated that although the two organisations are very different, there is the likelihood of confusion in the marketplace by virtue of the fact that both organisations use the letters WWF. The fund has indicated that it does not want to have any association with the World Wrestling Federation. We will utilise the opportunity to position ourselves, emphasising the entertainment aspect of our company, and at the same time allay the concerns of the fund. World Wrestling Federation was renamed World Wrestling Entertainment and later requested to be known solely as WWE. In 2003, following the invasion of the NWO and the return of Hulk Hogan, Vince McMahon began to interfere in matches to ensure that the invaders from WCW would not dominate his roster. During the iconic match between Hogan and The Rock, McMahon came to ringside and distracted Hogan, allowing for The Rock to attack him from behind with a chair before gaining the victory. This led to bad blood between Hogan and McMahon, and their storyline carried on through much of the year. When it came time for the pair to finally oppose one another in the ring, WrestleMania proved to be the most fitting of stages. After all, if you go back to the very beginning, WrestleMania 1, almost 2 decades prior, an event set up in Hogan's name and used as a tool to promote the company's top star, created and funded by Vince McMahon. The pair's careers diverging and combining over the course of almost 20 years to finally come toe-to-toe on the stage which they were both instrumental in the founding of. Magical moments like these are few and far between, so regardless of my personal feelings on the two men and the quality of their match, it is hard to argue with the magnitude of this encounter.
How you doing? Yeah. What's good in the hood?
Actually, I've blown the left one out twice, but that was very unique. Not too many people can sever quad tendons at the same time. That takes talent. You have no use of your legs at all. When you sever your quad tendons, and again both at the same time, you can't walk, you can't stand, you can't anything. At the Royal Rumble in 2005, the final two competitors were John Cena and Batista, who coincidentally eliminated each other at the same time to create a situation where the match had no definitive winner. Quickly needing to make a decision, Vince rushed from the back and sprinted out along the ramp, but in a cruel twist of fate, before he made it into the ring, he tore his quadricep muscle, rendering his leg completely useless. And, just as Cena and Batista had enacted their final attacks during the match, so did Vince's quads, his other leg giving way as his quadricep muscle ripped in his other leg. In horrific pain and unable to stand, Vince slumped down in the ring without explanation. The commentators, and more importantly the performers in the ring, had no idea what had just happened, only that they had just witnessed what on the surface is an aging man falling over. And now they must all remain calm, stick to the script, and most importantly, not laugh. Vince, ever the professional, continued on with the plan and was helped out to the back where he was quickly taken to a nearby hospital. Shawn Michaels explained to him how he had been reborn as a dedicated follower of Christianity. The pair were embroiled in a feud for much of 2006 and had Pro Wrestling Illustrated Match of the Year during their no-holds-barred bout at WrestleMania 22. Following their much-praised fight, the two continued their rivalry. This led to what is probably the most blasphemous match in all of pro wrestling history, when, at Backlash, Vince would team with his son Shane McMahon to take on the duo of Shawn Michaels and the Almighty God. That's right. In the weeks leading into the event, McMahon and his family attended church, knelt down to pray, and generally made a mockery of religion. As God was introduced to the ring, a ray of light represented the most holy entity in the universe as Somebody Call Your Mama played out over the speaker system, accompanied his debut inside of WWE. McMahon's argument was that because he didn't believe in God, Shawn would essentially have to fight two men in a handicap match. In a way, it's a shame, as Shane, Vince and Shawn put on a terrific and bloody affair. Brutal weapon usage punctuated really engaging wrestling from Michaels. The inclusion of a fictional god character only served to distract from the otherwise stellar display in the ring. I'm not sure why Shawn Michaels agreed to go along with what is at best a tasteless joke at the expense of Christianity, and at worst a direct mockery of one of his core identifiable beliefs.
You might have some support from this audience, but 95% of them are idiots.
As two larger-than-life figures make their way through the smoky fog, left behind by thousands of flashing lights and fireworks, inspirational music and patriotic anthems play over the sound of countless rabid fans' cheers, adorned in their favourite characters' colours, waving signs encouraging their victory and denouncing the bad guy. And although I was speaking about a WWE pro wrestling event, you clearly don't have to try hard to draw huge comparisons between the current way in which politics are presented in America, with its dramatic, energetic rallies and good old-fashioned wrestling. The pageantry, the emotion, the grandeur and the finances are all key components in both a successful political campaign in the United States and the modern day of world wrestling entertainment. The Mega Powers. Two older white gentlemen commanding attention with their larger-than-life personalities and penchant for delivering poetic rhetoric in the success of winning the hearts of their somewhat cult-like following. Their faces, both known globally as the head of companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange, with net worths of over $1 billion each. Dressed in sharp designer suits with a look of readiness in their eyes. The two men's respective teams waiting in the wings, ready to spring into action as the light beamed down on two men who came from opposing backgrounds, led very different lives, but somehow ended up in the same room, with so much in common. Born about a year apart, both men had gotten into their father's businesses and taken over, leading to huge global expansions. Vince McMahon had taken a small but successful regional wrestling brand and seen the potential for exponential growth. Robert Slater, in his book No Such Thing as Overexposure, wrote about Donald Trump. He respected what his father did and thought that he was a brilliant man, but he had higher ideals, a bigger picture in mind. This is the exact impression we get from Vincent McMahon when he speaks about what his father and grandfather built, allowing him to stand on their shoulders and become the most successful man in his industry's century-long history. Both Vincent McMahon and Donald Trump have a base in and around New York City, with Trump being born there in 1945. Both have since occupied a place amongst its most elite power players and have been working to accumulate their vast empires for most of their adult lives. It's not difficult to see how their paths could become entwined at some point in both men's eventful past. The real Donald Trump appeared a few weeks later on WWE's television. Portrayed as the people's champion, Donald Trump cut off the much-hated Vince McMahon character mid-sentence from the safety of a video link displayed on the enormous screens in the arena, to question whether McMahon really had the support of the WWE fans and whether Vince was delivering on his promise of giving the crowd value for money. In an opulent display of wealth, at this moment, Trump showered the live audience with money falling from the rafters, and in a scene reminiscent of the game show in the film Matilda, the fans reached to the ceiling and lapped it up, warming to the business magnate from New York, and not WWE. Trump later went on to explain, "The fans appreciated Trump more than they appreciated Vince, because I gave them a lot of money." Battle of the Billionaires. The next time Donald Trump would appear on WWE television would be to build towards a match at Wrestlemania 23, which, thankfully, would be fought by Trump's proxy, ECW champion Bobby Lashley, against a proxy of Vince McMahon's choosing, which ended up being the Samoan Umaga. When Donald Trump and Vince McMahon came face to face in this WrestleMania press conference, they expertly played their hands and had the world's media outlets perking up their ears. In weeks prior, Trump had expertly provoked the owner of the WWE into going to war. Both men had made it a personal affair, with insults slung at one another, building to a stipulation being added to the match during a painfully awkward 23-minute contract signing, one that would see the loser, either Trump or McMahon, have their heads shaved in defeat. The Battle of the Billionaires, as it became known, was watched by over 1.2 million homes around the world as a part of a WrestleMania 23 event which made over $5 million in ticket sales alone, some of whom had paid for their entry in the hopes of seeing one of these giants of the business world humiliated on a grand stage. And boy, how the fans weren't disappointed. After Umaga lost the match and Bobby Lashley was declared victorious, the pair of Trump and Lashley, with the aid of special guest referee Stone Cold Steve Austin, strapped the chairman of WWE down. Trump then laid in some of the worst looking punches in pro wrestling history and proceeded to take turns shaving Vince completely bald. Stone Cold Steve Austin then proceeded to flip the crowd on its head and delivered a shock Stone Cold Stunner to Donald Trump and finished the segment on a high, where most fans seemed jubilant with the idea that both the billionaires were defeated and the working class everyman, Stone Cold Steve Austin, came out on top. Money continued to play a role in the on-screen friction between Trump and McMahon when, whilst accusing McMahon of taking his fans for granted once again, Trump proceeded to announce his purchase of WWE's flagship brand, Monday Night Raw. Trump promised to put on a show that was unprecedented and did exactly that, when the next week's episode of Raw was presented without adverts and commercial breaks, and proved extremely popular with fans, bringing in Raw's highest viewership for more than 7 years. So believable was this on-screen storyline that the rise in viewership was tarred with the fact that WWE's stock price took a dip of nearly 7% the day after Trump and McMahon made their storyline declaration. In an attempt to rectify the situation, Donald Trump quickly sold the show back to McMahon, and in a desperate last-ditch effort, Trump stated, "I've got a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of billionaire friends, a lot of guys who want to buy this from me. I could double my money anytime I want to sell." In 2007, Vince McMahon had dreamt up one of the wackiest and most convoluted storylines in pro wrestling history, which culminated in an assassination attempt on his life, the WWE at the time reported. Last night on the USA Network, WWE's Monday Night Raw went out with a bang. At the end of his self-anointed Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night, WWE Chairman Mr. McMahon entered his limousine when it suddenly exploded. The shocking ending raising a myriad of questions. How could Mr. McMahon have survived the fiery explosion? And who could have committed such a heinous act? Although full details have not been disclosed, initial reports indicate that Mr. McMahon is presumed dead. An official investigation into Monday night's events is currently underway, with no one being ruled out as a suspect. Throughout the night, people from Mr. McMahon's past, from Donald Trump to Snoop Dogg to Bob Costas to Stone Cold Steve Austin, had less than flattering things to say about the WWE chairman. But would any go so far as to actually blow him up? The question of who done it, as well as the fate of Mr. McMahon, will be on everyone's minds as the WWE saga continues on Monday Night Raw. Unfortunate isn't the right word. What happened next was such an awkward and terrible coincidence that it is hard to put the blame on any one single person, of course, except for Chris Benoit. Following the on-screen death of Vince, news broke around the country that Benoit and his family had been brutally murdered inside of their own home.
When police got to the home, they found Chris Benoit's body, his wife's body, and his child's body. They also found steroids in the home. And when asked by reporters if the steroids could have played any part in the murder-suicide, the DA, Scott Ballard, said, quote, "We don't know yet. This is one of the things that we'll be looking at." And yet, almost immediately after, the WWE comes out with a statement saying steroids, quote, "were not and could not be related to the cause of death." How could you possibly know that? The toxicology reports are out. They're not going to come back for several weeks. So how can you so definitively say steroids played no part?
And obviously this is not an act of rage. It's an act of deliberation when you do something like this over 3 days. It's not an act of rage, be it steroid rage or roid rage, whatever it's called, or any other rage. Scheduled for a live event in Beaumont, Texas, and it was very much unlike Chris not to make live events.
And that was on Saturday, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And from there, our office contacted Chris to try and rearrange flights and things of that nature so that he would come in on Sunday for the pay-per-view, and actually late that Saturday night into the pay-per-view in Texas. And that was the last we heard of him. The flight was changed, and obviously when he didn't show up on Sunday, we knew that there was something drastically wrong, because his
MO was definitely to make all of his engagements. He was a consummate professional from a business standpoint. So we knew something was really wrong.
Cops saying in a press conference just a couple of hours ago that they found the wrestler hanging by a pulley on some exercise equipment in his home gym.
This has been so devastating as a father and a grandfather and a father figure to all those associated with our brand. This is not what we're about. What we're about is putting smiles on people's faces. This is the opposite of what we do. We're entertainers. We entertain people all over the world, and we put smiles on faces. That's our job description, not something like this to be tainted and smeared with this.
Wanting to be the first to break the news and control the narrative, WWE began to release information about the death via its mobile alert service and website.
Police now treating the discovery as a double murder-suicide.
This led WWE's PR teams going into overdrive and releasing the following message on their corporate website. It has been ruled that the deaths of Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy and their son Daniel earlier today were the results of a double murder-suicide from within the home. At the time, Tuesday nights for WWE meant ECW. Before its scheduled programming, the company aired a statement from company owner Vincent McMahon, who explained the following. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Last night on Monday Night Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show recognising the career of Chris Benoit. However, now some 26 hours later, the facts of this horrific tragedy are now apparent. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit's name tonight. On the contrary, tonight's show will be dedicated to everyone who has been affected by this terrible incident. The idea of not mentioning Chris Benoit's name is something that, in the time since, WWE have remained very strong-minded about, with the company, understandably, aiming to put as much distance from their brand and this horrific incident as possible. The WWE and Vince were forced to immediately backtrack on the Vince McMahon limousine angle, and the character was magically resurrected by the time the following SmackDown and Raw episodes aired.
But that's what you're dealing with. It's not like you don't deal with a killer and not expect him to try to kill you.
CM Punk infamously left the WWE after the 2014 Royal Rumble. As his time came to a close with Vince McMahon's company, Punk's relationship with WWE and Vince turned hostile. The bitterness and lack of sincere collaboration between the two meant that contract negotiations stalled, leading to complete chaos. However, the way in which his termination played out was just as chaotic as his notorious on-screen run from 2011 until his departure from the company. The day of my wedding, I got a FedEx in the mail. It was my termination papers. I was fired on my wedding day. Very calculated, very deliberate. As much as I chuckled at it and didn't let it affect my day, I was like, once again, you pushed too far, you pushed the wrong guy. The WWE and Vince McMahon have explained their side of the story. I'd like to apologise. Sometimes in a big corporation, the legal people don't necessarily know what talent relations are doing, and Punk got his severance papers on the day he got married, and that was a coincidence, so I want to personally apologise for that. But CM Punk remains sceptical of WWE's approach to terminating his employment. I don't want to hear, oh, it's coincidence. I don't want to hear, oh, the lawyers didn't talk to talent relations. I talked to Hunter on the 11th. On the 13th, FedExed overnight, I got a document that was dated the 12th. My wife asked for that time off so she could A, get married, and B, go on her honeymoon. The weekend after her honeymoon, she was back on TV. They knew. Now we will never know for sure one way or the other. Was the arrival date and timing of the termination documents merely a cruel twist of fate, unconsciously coincidental in ruining what should have been a beautiful wedding day? Or was the timing perfectly planned by WWE and Vince McMahon in order to inflict the greatest amount of pain to their exiting employee? CM Punk said, "Let me tell you a personal story about Vince McMahon, alright? We do this whole bully campaign, and while we'll never know what that story was, there's certainly enough to choose from when it comes to Vince McMahon."
The Superfly! Wow.
In one corner of the ring was a naked professional wrestler. In the other corner were 9 sheriff deputies, all fully clothed, plus 2 deputy dogs. It was, according to all reports, an even match that ended only after 3 dog bites, including to a deputy, another injury, and the final apprehension of the wrestler on numerous charges. Deputies said they arrived at the Howard Johnson Motor Lodge in the town of Salina about 1:40 a.m. to check on a report of a woman screaming and found a naked man and a woman covered only by a sheet. The woman was hysterical and shouting that she wanted to get away from the man, deputies said. The woman, identified by deputies as Nancy Argentino, 22, of Brooklyn, was forced back into the room she shared with the wrestler. Jimmy S. Snooker, 39, of New Haven, Connecticut, deputies said. Deputies said Snooker closed the door and refused to talk with deputies, although he continued shouting and appeared very angry and threatening. Deputies said Snooker, billed as the Superfly in wrestling circles, is a professional wrestler with a very muscular build and is very strong. The man remained uncooperative and authorities could not reason with him, deputies said. The victim continued screaming that she wanted to leave the room.
I don't believe he's faking it, Lehigh County Judge Kelly Bennick said, according to the paper. No offense, but I don't think he's smart enough to fake it.
The autopsy report has never been transcribed. However, I was orally advised that Dr. Mihalikis concluded that death was consistent with a single fall, whereby the victim struck her head on a hard substance, such as pavement. The doctor did not find any bruises, lacerations, or any other indications of a beating or prior injuries. The doctor did not find any evidence of recent sexual contact. Finally, the doctor did not find any unusual amounts of dirt, gravel, or other substances on Miss Argentino's clothing. With this information, the cause of death would have been termed accidental if a formal autopsy report was prepared. Vince McMahon tried to talk her out of making the complaint against Snooker. Jimmy Snooker said, "Shortly after Nancy's death, I was questioned by police and let go. At one point, I went with Vince McMahon Jr. to either a court or law office, I don't remember which, because I was still in shock. All I remember is he had a briefcase with him. I don't know what happened. I think Vince Jr. picked me up from the hotel and took me there. He didn't say anything to me. I don't know if he gave Nancy's family money or anything." I certify the above-named defendant, Jimmy S. Snooker, was convicted in this court of the offence of assault in violation of the law of the state of New York, and judgment was entered the 17th day of April 1983 before the Honourable H.L. Harding, a justice of this court, and the defendant was sentenced. Pled guilty to assault, third, received a 1-year conditional discharge, plus paid a $15 fee. The issuing a bad check was dismissed.
So what had happened? She fell?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, banged her head and,
Was she conscious?
She was not feeling too good.
Right.
Jimmy McDevitt, Vince McMahon's lawyer, sent his response to a documentary maker who had covered the mystery surrounding the Jimmy Snooker case, saying, "Your insinuation that Mr. McMahon in some unspecified way kept authorities from charging Jimmy Snooker for murder in 1983 is an odious lie."
Nancy Argentina has been notified about Mr. Snooker's arrest, and I want to thank them for their patience during the time that this case was being investigated by the grand jury.
However, Vince McMahon's involvement is not mentioned in any of the legal case files, but Snooker not only remembers going to the court with the owner of the WWE, but also that he had a briefcase with him, mentioning that even Snooker wasn't sure if his boss paid off the murdered woman's family.
He was the high-flying superstar of wrestling, but now Jimmy Superfly Snuka is in the battle of his life.
So, is Jimmy Snooker lying about Vince McMahon's involvement, or are the court records wrong? Or, even more mysteriously, were the legal documents purposeful in their omission of McMahon as a way of distancing the police from the large suitcase full of cash they had just taken as a bribe? There's no real way we'll ever fully know the truth. McMahon told the Argentino family's initial attorney, Richard Cushing, in 1983, "Look, I'm in the garbage business. If you think I'm going to be hurt by the revelation that one of my wrestlers is really a violent individual, you're mistaken." Argentino suffered in hospital for 4 long months before she eventually died from her injuries. Jimmy Snooker admitted he was present and was investigated by police, but not charged with a crime. That is, until 2015, when the case was reopened. Snooker was charged with misdemeanor assault in the 3rd degree, felony assault count in the 2nd degree, and misdemeanor counts of resisting arrest and obstructing government administration. Snooker, however, was deemed unfit to stand trial due to his age and mental health. No formal connection was ever made between Vince McMahon and the Snooker case, with the former Superfly superstar passing away before any conclusion could be made about his guilt.
This is Camp WWE, a short-lived animated series which focuses on the lives and stories of several iconic pro wrestlers from the WWE roster, reimagined as school children attending an imaginary summer camp. Undeniably, the owner of the WWE in real life and the owner of the camp in the animation, Vincent McMahon steals the show. His voice work is excellent, and as he lends his gravelly tones to the dark humour which is written for his 2D persona, it's a perfect fit. As a businessman in real life, Vince McMahon is a person who is reserved about his personal life and respected within his own world. On screen, in both live action and animation, Vince McMahon excels at playing the evil boss. He delivers offensive and sometimes sickeningly dark humour. To me, was a real giggle, and maintained this level through the show. Vince McMahon acts as the head of Camp WWE and treats it as if he is indeed running a billion-dollar company akin to real-life WWE. Throughout the show, stupid studios have thought of creative similarities between the two jobs and push it further to show McMahon's character as equal parts evil dictator and hilariously unaware.
Vince McMahon is aware of the leg up he was given with regards to his position within the wrestling landscape, and as such, he has never shied away from his desire to afford his own children the same advantages. WWE financial records show Shane McMahon was paid a total of over $1,300,000 as a performer within the company, despite only entering the ring for a match on one occasion. In the lead up to the Royal Rumble in 2022, Shane was selected as the man who would be responsible for the way in which the action would be scripted during the match. Shane was executive vice chairman of the board of directors and a minority owner within the WWE, but seemingly he took that power and completely abused it. Shane inexplicably planned the main action points of the match around himself, which made no sense regarding the lead up to the match, nor did it make any of the performers in the bout look good. It created zero memorable moments and only served to drag the atmosphere of the entire event to a screeching halt. After making it to the final three, Shane made his way to the locker room where he was greeted by anger and friction in regards to his involvement and production of the Rumble match. Vince had no choice. Shane created chaos, had everyone in an uproar, pissed off everyone in the Rumble, openly buried other producers and was changing things that Vince wanted. Vince had no other choice but to send him home. A few days later, Vince proved that he had to side with the company over his family and that Shane's privileges had run out, ending Shane's contract and firing him from his duties in WWE. After Shane had left the building, Vince was reported to have shouted, "Shane will never get another pop in this company as long as I'm around." Through it all, through the betrayal, heartache and backstabbing, there is something about Vince McMahon which has endeared him to his employees and business colleagues throughout his entire career. My relationship with Vince was great. We were very close the first time I was there, and then we had a falling out in 2006, and we didn't really speak for 11 years. But when I met him back again in 2017, when I came back, it was like nothing ever happened. We were hugging each other, telling each other that we loved one another. We just picked up where we left off. Though there have been many who have sworn to never return to WWE after a life-altering intervention from the owner of the company, there have been only a small number of names who were once scorned by Vince but did not make amends eventually. It wouldn't matter if I was 36. I think that you have to overcome the stereotypes sometimes. Vince is not hip, he's not with it. I've never been cool, I could give a shit about that. But you listen to people and you try to give them as much creative ability as possible, it makes them more invested. If there's an idea that I really like and a performer says, "I'm not so sure, I don't like that," I say, what's the alternative? If they have an alternative that's better, great. There's no pride of authorship. That's the way to go. Thank you very much. But you do need to lead. You can't just wait. You need to lead, that's for sure. Here's what I'm offering. Not buying it, here's what I'm offering. Because you can't dictate to the audience what they're going to like. Bruno Sammartino returned to the company and embraced Vince McMahon after decades away. The Ultimate Warrior buried the ill feelings and was celebrated by the company and by Vince before his death. Stone Cold Steve Austin came back after being fired by a man he saw as somewhat of a father figure. There's just something about this business magnate which attracts people in for life. So many have come out in support of McMahon through his countless trials and tribulations. Still to this day, dozens of performers have explained how they cherish their relationship with Vince, owe him their gratitude, and in some cases their careers. Vince McMahon may be ruthless and at times even heartless, but it is clear that behind the scenes, his warmth and dedication to his company and its employees has never wavered, even until his final days atop the mountain. I think there is a locker room and an office filled with fabulously wealthy people thanks to the 22-hour workday of Vince McMahon for the past 40 years. I have absolutely nothing bad to say about Vince McMahon. What a hypocrite I would be to say anything less than extraordinarily complimentary things about that man. His work ethic, his willingness to put in 22 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for 40 years, is why we are all fabulously wealthy. He'll never get the credit or understanding that he truly deserves and he earned. These relationships with his talent have come at a permanent cost for Vince throughout his entire career. All of the time spent maintaining the status quo and doting on his performers' needs meant Vince has admitted to neglecting his wife.
WWE founder Vince McMahon has stepped away from wrestling as the board of the company investigates a $3 million payment made to a former employee with whom he allegedly had an affair.
Unbelievable! Unbelievable!
Vince McMahon has openly admitted to having a highly active and ferocious sexual appetite.
I've got an insatiable appetite for life, and I want more.
In 2022, all of this unusual sex and built-up tension came to a head when detailed information about allegations against Vince McMahon became public knowledge.
It comes amid a scandal revealed earlier this week by the Wall Street Journal. The board of directors is now investigating whether McMahon paid $3 million in hush money to a former employee with whom he apparently had a consensual relationship.
A long list of offences came to light, all of which are as disgusting as they are regrettable. As far back as 1992, a former WWF female referee had made claims that when she denied McMahon's sexual advances, she was raped in a company-owned limousine. Rita Chatterton said that Vince had continually requested oral sex from the young performer and had become aggressive when he was initially shut down. On Geraldo Rivera's Now It Can Be Told show, the former referee's story was backed up by a wrestler by the name of Leonard Inzitari, but no charges were ever brought forth against McMahon at the time. In 2006, Vince was once again accused of sexual harassment by a female whilst visiting a tanning salon in Florida. A young woman claimed that Vince had attempted to grope her while she was working. McMahon denied the accusations, but a police report was filed in late January. However, no charges were processed against Vince at this time. As April of 2022 rolled around, news came to light that $3 million was missing from the WWE's company's financial accounts. The company quickly set to work investigating the missing funds. However, upon closer inspection, it was discovered that the amount which had been removed from the company's accounts amassed to a lot more. But even more interesting was the person responsible for these transactions. What was it that Vince said in his early career about wrestling promoters and stealing?
I have pledged my complete cooperation, and I will do everything possible to support the investigation. I have also pledged to accept the findings, whatever they are.
The way that it happened put a really bad mark on what he had done in the industry. He had taken it to the heights that none of us could have ever imagined. But we said privately, if there was one of these payments, there's going to be more. I think they have done an amazing job from keeping it spiralling out of control. As the news outlets gained wind of this sensational story, a moment which many thought impossible came to pass. Vince McMahon, the infinite and undefeatable cornerstone of World Wrestling Entertainment, stepped down as CEO and chairman of the company and announced his retirement in July of 2022. I would like to thank my family for mightily contributing to our success, and I would also like to thank all of our past and present superstars and employees for their dedication and passion for our brand.
Most importantly, I would like to thank our fans for allowing us into your homes every week and being your choice of entertainment. I hold the deepest appreciation and admiration for our generations of fans all over the world who have liked, currently like, and sometimes even love our form of sports entertainment. A man so important within the entire pro wrestling industry that somehow I had almost forgotten his age as well as his misdemeanors. When I was born, Vince owned and ran the WWF. As I grew up watching during the Attitude Era, Vince McMahon was front and center with Steve Austin. My teenage years were spent watching the Ruthless Aggression Era in the early 2000s, with once again McMahon playing a major role. Through my 20s, Vince had always been there as once again WWE evolved to incorporate the very future of the business in NXT and its female roster, and now I am 30 and Mr. McMahon has been here my entire life. Like everyone else, I'm mostly just kinda surprised. I don't think anybody's ever made as big a footprint as Vince McMahon. I feel kinda sad about it actually. I know people probably think I would be gloating or happy to see him go through what he's going, but I don't. I feel bad that it happened, or whatever happened. I think his loss or his absence from the business will be sorely missed. It feels almost surreal to have witnessed his downfall, and, in a way, I'm sad that it ended in such a distasteful manner. I mean, is there a surprise in any industry when it happens? And really, when you look at it, it's not illegal. He had an affair, paid the lady off to not say anything and moved on. People want to jump on it, but there's still always an undertone of it's wrestling. If you look, that story came out with a bang and then you really haven't heard anything about it since. If this was Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein, but the difference between that was he was holding women back from getting gigs. Harvey Weinstein, either bang me or you don't get the starring role. This has never been said in Vince's thing. There was a mutual acknowledgement of this affair, and then he paid the lady to say nothing, and she took the money. I really know Vince well, and it sucked that it happened, and it sucks that he did it, but is anything really going to happen from it? I don't think so. As of right now, Vince McMahon still holds a controlling 32% stake of the company's shares, but is said officially to have no creative or business control over the WWE. In his enormous wake, Vince left behind a chasm within the boardroom and within creative meetings, which, for such an enormous entity, needed to be filled almost instantly, or the entire company could risk serious damages.
I think I'm going to go to the nearest nudie bar and have a drink. Come on, Tajiri, you're coming with me. Come on.
You're touching a lot of lives, mostly negatively. You think it was just supposed to be sexual. We were supposed to have a great time and be better off, but it's always more complicated than that. It can interfere with your own life too. Having an affair, running off here and there can take a lot of energy. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time. The last 5 or 6 years, I found that I not only appreciate my wife more, but I can get a hell of a lot more done.
McMahon is married to Linda McMahon, who ran for the U.S. Senate and served in the Trump administration.
I approve this message because it's time for something different.
We've been married for 34 years now, but we're really different. There comes a time in a person's life when they have to make a decision. They have to choose sides, and I have finally chosen my family. My family has always been first with me and always will be. It's not a perfect family. I'm well aware of the flaws in my husband's character. I'm aware that our family is not the normal, average American family, but it is my family, and I'm the matriarch of this family, and anyone who's against my family is against me. I tease Linda about the sacrifices I've made for my marriage, but she has made enormous sacrifices. When Linda and I got married, I promised her 2 things, that I'd always love her and that there would never be a boring moment. I've lived up to both promises. I have always been loyal. Not necessarily faithful. I probably lied to myself, thinking she knew who I was when we got married. The wild guy, but I never ever threw anything in her face. I was discreet, and Linda never suffered from a lack of attention, physical or emotional, but one day she asked me point blank, "Are you having an affair with so-and-so?" And I've never lied to her. Yes. It crushed her. Then she asked, "What about such and such?" Yes. I went on. More names, I said. Yes and yes. Some were concurrent, but I didn't think she had to know that. She didn't ask that question, or I'd have to say yes to that too. It's not something I'm proud of. I just didn't realise the impact of messing with other people's lives. Notwithstanding the impact on my wife, I'm talking about the havoc you create in others' lives, just from wanting to have a good time. There's no such thing as an innocent fling. When a woman commits to a sexual encounter, it's generally with a great deal of emotion. With a very few exceptions, it's not just, let's have sex, boy that was great, okay see you. Women don't do that, so I guess, maybe, I hurt a lot of people. The sex was terrific, but from an emotional standpoint, I regret it. I have been not only loyal but faithful for about 6 years. Linda and I have a great marriage and I don't want to screw it up. I'm not saying I don't look. I'm not saying I won't fall off the wagon one day. I hope not, because all of the complications and because I would have to tell her if she asks me. But other than for the innate, I don't have a desire to go outside of our relationship.
So, first thing I should say is no comment. Okay. Second thing I should say about stuff and just Vince in general, and maybe it's more about love, if you love somebody, is that people make mistakes and you love them regardless, you know? So.
This next part feels like a storyline taken directly from a HBO drama like Game of Thrones or Succession. Taking over in Vince's absence is his son-in-law, Paul Levesque, better known in WWE as Triple H. And why wouldn't he? After all, can you think of a better man suited for the position?
You know him as the cerebral assassin, the king of kings!
14-time WWE World Heavyweight Champion. The game!
Triple H.
Triple H.
Triple H.
Triple H!
But when we look at the wider, longer picture, we see a real-life story which, in my opinion, far outweighs any drama the writers behind the scenes in WWE could ever imagine. If we travel back to the late 90s, just as in some medieval fantasy, pro wrestlers were forbidden for dating the daughter of the king. It would have made things far too complicated. Vince always stuck to his father's advice of keeping a separation between a promoter and a performer. But for young Stephanie, the allure of the forbidden fruit proved too strong.
You take me to him! Take me to the son of a bitch!
My dad gave us the okay to date, and then took it away, because if we were really going to be together, it would have to be a big deal, and it would have to be the right thing to do. So, he let us come together, and then he made us be apart, and we came back together again, and if it was meant to be, it was meant to be. In secret, she began dating Triple H, whom at the time was still to make his way into the main event. Before anything happened romantically between us, we spoke to Vince about the situation, and he told us he was okay with him. Soon after that, though, he changed his mind. He said he gave it more thought and realised, this won't work out, you two cannot do this. He took it away just like that. Their love proved too powerful to hide for long, and soon their relationship became known by the company. In an attempt to separate the pairing, Vince wrote a storyline where Stephanie would be married off to a young stud by the name of Test. However, when Vince spoke to Triple H and realised that his feelings for Stephanie were genuine, the storyline changed. On screen we saw Triple H sedate an unsuspecting Stephanie and steal her away from the altar, only to conduct a marriage ceremony of his own in Las Vegas. All of these on-screen antics proved the foundation for the pair's real-life relationship to flourish from. In October of 2003, they would go on to be married for real in New York City. Over the next 15 years, both Paul and Stephanie's stock would continue to rise within WWE, both proving to be dedicated to the company, something which Vince has proved to value over all else. Stephanie has worked tirelessly behind the scenes in order to develop the company's relationships in the US and internationally, as well as contributing massively to WWE's charitable efforts. I really enjoy doing the things I do with WWE. Paul Levesque is the guy, but don't think that Stephanie McMahon is not. That is one of the smartest people in the business, and I'm sure they talk about stuff all the time because that's the element of the couple that they are. Triple H was given the trust of Vince when he was handed the reins of WWE developmental brand NXT, a task which Levesque proved beyond doubt that he was capable of, taking NXT from small-time developmental to a taster of the main stage as WWE's third brand. Triple H and McMahon seemingly share a similar outlook on how things should be run in general within the company. However, both Paul and Vince have many areas where their ideas seem to clash. Chocolate and vanilla. I want chocolate, you want vanilla. One of us has to pick a flavour. Vince would always pick the flavour.
Now it's my turn to pick the flavour. It's all good, it's all ice cream, but it's my time to pick the flavour, and I have to be confident in these decisions. I can't look back and say, what would Vince want to have for flavour, because it just wouldn't be authentic then. Look, in some manner, I think for both of us it's a tough situation for him, and I think in some manner it's even harder for me, even now that he's not in the equation, and he's not in any way, shape or form, but it's hard to think about, right? That he's not here, and I think in that moment, it was hard for him to think about somebody coming in and doing what he's done for 50 years successfully, better than anybody in the world. So yeah, there was definitely that moment, definitely giving me advice, but also in some manner, most of that advice was centered around, this is what you've been sitting next to me learning how to do for 25 years, and you got it. Just be confident in your decision making, listen to people, be open to ideas, be collaborative with other people, things like that. Just wonderful advice. When tragedy struck and Paul Levesque suffered a heart attack, his position atop NXT was vacated. At this time, NXT changed from the much beloved black and gold brand, complete with some indie legends and up-and-comers, to an out-and-out developmental brand once again, the image of the show being overhauled as the title was changed to NXT 2.0. Many of the foundations set by Triple H were removed and his project was reconstructed in his absence, in the image of his father-in-law, whom claimed he had always reserved the final say over all aspects of WWE programming, including NXT. To many, this seemed like a punishment for NXT's performance as it went up against AEW Dynamite, but this has never been confirmed. What is clear to see, however, is that the timing of these huge changes cannot simply be a coincidence. A few years on and now Vince must vacate his throne. His son has been reckless, hot-headed, and never looked fully committed to becoming the heir. His daughter is a capable leader in her own right and a well-established businesswoman, but she has never gained a deeper understanding of the promotion and presentation of pro wrestling, as she has never acted as a regular in-ring performer. Triple H, Paul Levesque, he has it all. Family loyalty, work ethic, industry experience, great connection. He really does seem to be the perfect person to be claimed the new king of WWE. And take on what seems to be one of the most complicated and difficult jobs in the entire entertainment industry.
WWE has been on a roll. They have $1.1 billion in revenue and have been doing really well. And Vince is iconic. Whatever you feel about him or his outrageousness, he's iconic.
Leaving us with the company we know today. WWE has been responsible for some of the most influential and iconic moments in entertainment history, promoting shows across 150 different countries worldwide, holding more than 300 live events a year with hundreds of millions, if not billions of fans interacting online and watching at home. They created the WWE Network in 2014, a home for an unfathomable amount of historic and legendary wrestling matches and moments from the last century. WWE has its fair share of detractors, many of whom criticise the company for the way in which it has changed over the years. Supporters of the company will respond with the notion that WWE was forced to change with the times in order to be relevant in the present and deliver to fans what they want. The last 20 years have seen WWE steadily increase its revenue to record highs, whilst losing weekly television viewers by the bucket load. Perhaps as everyone transitions from traditional media to streaming services online, this is inevitable, but it is also a reminder that long-time fans of the company are being pushed away in droves as the WWE continues to move further away from the product which first got them invested as a wrestling fan. You have the right to feel however you like about WWE and the wider wrestling world, but there is no possible argument for the fact that the McMahon family revolutionised the grappling industry on the way to becoming billionaires. Their company has produced a lifetime of joyous memories for fans like me, and for that we should always be grateful. Who knows what the next 100 years hold for world wrestling entertainment and the pro wrestling world at large. When we look back and see how much one single company has changed and evolved over the past century, it is mind-blowing to try and imagine how sports entertainment will be presented in the future. I, for one, am extremely excited to find out. When Vince McMahon flung his glistening smile towards the baying paparazzi, he held aloft a gold star which signified his place amongst entertainment's elite. He was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2009 and shared a tender moment with his family as he was presented with his plaque. but this is only one way in which Vince McMahon's hard work and dedication to our entertainment should be remembered. It is unquestionable in my mind, regardless of the dark side of his career, Vince McMahon has single-handedly changed the very fabric of pro wrestling more than any other individual ever. He is the core unchangeable element which pulls together the dusty black and white days of his father's territories through the muscle-clad mega men of the 80s and the neon stars of the 90s. He is entangled with the gritty realism of the Attitude Era and the sparkling lights of the current period of WWE. Without Vincent Kennedy McMahon, the very landscape of the wrestling world would be entirely different, and there are only a handful of other figures you could ever truthfully say that about. Vince has given his entire life to the industry, and yes, he has been handsomely rewarded for his hard work and sacrifice, but he has also had to act selfishly in his own focused ambitions, as he regularly placed the needs of his company over his own and his family's.